You're listening to the first ever Purely Rational podcast. You can check out our website at purelyrational.com. You can also check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/purelyrationalblog. And I got to level with you. I've never done anything like this before. I really don't know shit about podcasts. I don't know anything about audio editing or video editing. I've never uploaded anything to YouTube. I've watched YouTube, but I've never paid attention to the fact that I have an account. But what I do know is I've got a little bit of skills in web design, and I've got a passion that's developed over the last couple of years, and this passion is resisting the attempts of mainstream religion to dictate how we live our lives. I've always grown up as not really a skeptic, but I was never really given any religious education. There's an oxymoron for you, religious education. I never went to church when I was a kid. It was not something that my parents ever really talked to me about. I know now that they wanted me to grow up and they wanted me to make my own decisions, which I'm grateful for. I'm glad they didn't, try to put me through some kind of childhood indoctrination. I might be a completely different person today if that were the case, but as it is, I grew up and I always kind of looked at church and religion and people's beliefs in God with kind of a grain of salt. I thought it was kind of weird, to be honest with you. I went to church a few times, and it was always with a friend. I got a friend whose parents made him go to church, and they'd invite me along, hey, come along, keep me company. They either didn't like to go, or they legitimately had fun, and they wanted me to come hang out with them and see how fun it was. And I went a couple times when I was a kid. I was real naive. I had no idea what it was about. And, I remember the first time I went with a friend. I had a friend tell me, hey, come on, just come with me, just keep me company. He didn't seem like he really liked it, but he kind of feigned enthusiasm, So finally, after a couple weeks of trying to get me to go, he convinces me. And I was like, all right. And I went and asked my dad. And again, my parents are skeptics too. And they never really addressed the topic of religion with me, especially at such a young age. I think I was probably about 11, maybe 10 years old at the time. And I go up to my dad and I said, hey, Dad, can I go with Kenny to to church on Sunday? He wants me to go check out his church. They have a youth group. He said he has a lot of fun, and he said he just doesn't want to go by himself. And my dad looks at me. Really? He wants you to go, huh? Yeah, of course. He's a friend. He wants to hang out, and I wouldn't mind checking it out. And he reiterates to me, is it Kenny that wants you to go, or maybe his parents want you to go? And I'm like, no, it's nothing like that. Nothing like that. And as soon as he feels like I'm not being pressured by some adult or church leader to, get indoctrinated into their faith, he okays it. He's like, all right, yeah, go check it out. See if you like it. So I go with him. And that situation has stuck with me forever. I swear it was the most uncomfortable thing ever. They weren't a particularly weird church. I mean, there's a lot more churches out there that do some crazy shit. Like, they weren't Pentecostals running around speaking in tongues or anything like that. And they weren't dancing around and singing the praises of Jesus Christ or nothing. But there's a lot of praying, and there was a lot of focusing on me. It was like they wanted to make it about me. There was this new face in the church. I'm just some kid. I've never done this before. I'm uncomfortable in church as it is. So I walk in these doors to this tiny, just old, kind of run down church. Poor excuse for a church, to be honest with you. It was in a tiny town in the middle of the desert in Nevada. But so I go in there, and first thing, everybody looks at me. Oh, we've got somebody new, and they start clapping, and they start talking to me, and they file by me one by one to introduce themselves, and they have this little song. I think this is probably just because I was a kid, as to attract the kids. They have this little song they sing to me. I have no idea how it goes. I wouldn't want to do that to you guys, to try and sing it in the first place, but they all start singing the song to me, welcoming me to the church. They give me candy, and finally they leave me the hell alone. That was just very uncomfortable for me. And they go through the whole service, and I remember the pastor talking about death, to a group of children. Again, 10 or 11 years old, he's talking about death. And why some people die early and some people die when they're old, and how, sometimes God needs to take away somebody when they're younger because they're just that good. He needs them in heaven. They're such a good soul that, they're too good for earth. They need to be taken away because they can be put to better use in heaven. And I'm just kind of sitting here scratching my head like, I'd rather be playing baseball right now. But, whatever. I went through the motions. Never once wanted to go to church ever again. Never went with him again, that's for sure. I think I checked it out a few more times in, various other churches growing up. But, it never really stuck with me. I always had this creepy feeling when I go into a church, like I shouldn't be there. Just intimidating, kind of ominous feeling. And I'm grateful for that. I think that was instilled in me by my parents. It was never something that they forced me to believe. They never forced me to believe there is no God. All they did is they instilled in me a critical thinking mind. They made a rational thinker. I like to think I'm rational anyways. I don't know, maybe I'm a retard, but I like to think I'm rational. And I like to think I've taken the evidence given to me, and I've concluded with my own brain that I think all of these God myths, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hindu, the God of Krishna, all these myths are just clearly not true. They just can't be true. And because I didn't grow up with that indoctrination, I don't fear it. And I'm not sitting here thinking like, I shouldn't be thinking this way. It's bad to think this way. I'm going to go to hell. I'm going to burn forever. It's not like that. It's bullshit. I don't feel I'm going to burn in hell because I don't think hell's real either. I don't think the devil's real. I mean, I love the show Supernatural, but it's fiction. It's just as much fiction as it is the Bible. Anyways, I digress. There's just a little bit about my childhood and where I come from, just so you know I'm not somebody who, broke out of a religious lifestyle and now I'm an atheist. I use the term atheist, but I've always just kind of been a skeptical thinker. I've always been uncomfortable about religion, and it's only as of the last few years that I really became an atheist. Like, I use the term atheist very deliberately. I don't believe that true atheism, truly believing there certainly is no God, I don't believe that's right. I don't believe it's very scientific to say that there most certainly isn't something, because it can't be scientifically proven. But again, I use the word atheist deliberately because I don't want there to be any confusion. I don't want people to hear that I'm an agnostic and think that, maybe there's a chance that he'll be saved by the Lord Jesus Christ. No. When it comes to Yahweh, I'm an atheist. To the max. There is no Yahweh. That's what I believe. Same with Allah, same with, the tenets of Judaism, same with Krishna, same with Thor and Zeus and Ra, and every other god that society's ever thought of. Jesus is no different. Maybe there's something out there we might call a god, but, I believe that if it's out there, we don't understand it, and it's something that would be studyable. Maybe there's some force out there beyond our capacity to understand at this moment in time. That doesn't give us an excuse. Just because we don't understand the universe does not give us an excuse to fill in the blanks with mythology. Just because I can't explain what caused atoms to go from, inanimate atomic particles to life forms that can operate and move and sustain themselves on their own, just because I can't explain abiogenesis doesn't mean that it automatically makes your myth true. It just means we have more to study. I find the scientific world fascinating, and that's something we need to create awareness about. And why? Why do I need to get on this, $15 microphone and put myself on YouTube trying to get people to not believe in God? That's a good question. I don't think there's any problem with people believing stupid things. If you're a grown adult and you want to believe in God or, Poseidon, it really doesn't make any difference to me. What does make a difference, though, is when you take those frankly stupid beliefs and you take them to Congress and you tell my friends that they're not allowed to marry the person that they love because the person they love is the same gender as them. And you say this based off of that stupid mythology, that scientifically ignorant mythology that you have been feared into believing. You take that and you try to ruin somebody else's life. Yeah, I take issue with that. That brings me to YouTube. That brings me to a podcast that I'm trying to make that's probably not going to go anywhere because I have no talent in this department, but it gives me the desire to speak out. When our scientists are on the cusp of discovering breakthroughs in the medical field via stem cells, embryonic stem cells, and you block that because you believe that a blastocyst is somehow a human being with a soul, something that doesn't have a brain yet, or nerves, or lungs, or heart, or blood, is somehow a soul that's going to feel pain. And you block that. You prevent these scientists from potentially curing scores of diseases and furthering the medical field to lengths we can't even imagine right now. You block that because, why? Because of a soul? What exactly is a soul? Show me a soul, and I'll lend you some credibility. Tell me what color is a soul? What does it look like? What does it smell like? Does it feel like? Is there really a soul, or is it just the chatter going on in your head that we all have? Don't get me wrong. I'm very mystified about why we are the way we are, what gives us this consciousness, what happens when we die, the big questions. Everybody has the big questions. We have had them since the beginning of time. Everybody wants to know the answers to these questions. The fact is, we simply do not know. We simply don't know, and we're not even close to knowing what happens when we die. What happens to our consciousness, why we're here, what our thoughts are made up of, what caused us to be animated whereas a rock is inanimate. We're working on it, though. And the only way that human beings have to learn anything new is through the scientific process. It was probably fascinating at some point in time to look at a bird, some point in the past to look at a bird and say, wow, how is that bird defying gravity? I throw a rock and it falls to the ground, but this bird can fly away and it stays afloat, and yeah, that must be fun. How do you do that? So we study the bird and we learn about air pressure and the shape of the wing, and then, lo and behold, through science we figure out a way to make a craft. We can make ourselves fly. We now have airplanes. We would have never gotten that far if it weren't for the scientific process, and that's far advanced in the scientific process compared to what they had to work with back in the days the Old Testament was written. But you know what I'm saying. Let's back it up a little bit. This podcast is actually intended to be more of an introduction to Purely Rational, just kind of giving you a little feel for where I come from, what my thoughts are on it. And I'm not a bad guy. I don't hate religious people, not by any means. Hold on a second though. If a religious person gives me a reason to hate them, I will hate them. That's on an individual basis. I don't hate people because they're religious. When it comes to that, I think of my grandmother. She's just the nicest, sweetest lady you would ever meet. A lot of people say that about their grandmothers, but this is absolutely true. I mean, she is by far, the nicest person. She would never harm you. She's so supportive and nice and sweet, and she is, quite frankly, a Bible thumper. I mean, she will talk your ear off about Christianity if you let her, and it helps her. Christianity, it kind of made her who she is. She feels she has to be that great, nice person through Christianity. And that's awesome for some people. I'm glad she is where she is with that. But I personally believe that she would have been just as nice of a person without Christianity. Whatever crutch she needed to lean on to make her that nice, beautiful person, she would have found that anyways. That's inside of her. That's not inside of a book filled with genocide and slavery. But she can live it. It's hers. She's not hurting anybody. There are people out there that do hurt people, though. If you want to ask me to respect Fred Phelps of the Westboro Baptist Church, well, that's not going to happen. He uses that very same book my grandma uses, by the way. He uses to march on the parade. Excuse me, that was me stumbling on my words because I suck at podcasts. He uses it to march on the funerals of soldiers who gave their lives to allow him the freedom of speech to do what he's doing. I'm a veteran myself, so that kind of hits a extra tough nerve for me. But I just think what they're doing sick. They don't limit it to soldiers. That's just probably what gets the most press. They wanted to protest the funerals of those babies, those children, those little boys and girls that died in Connecticut to the hands of that crazy shooter, the Newtown, Connecticut shooting. They wanted to go to those little girls' funerals, and bravo to the hacker group Anonymous. Bravo for standing up for those children and their families. They came out and said, basically if you do this, we're going to declare war on you, internet war, cyber war. They shut their website down, and boy, they stuck to their guns. Anyways, I'm on a tangent again. So yeah, I don't hate people because of their beliefs. I don't dislike people because of their beliefs, but I don't respect them because of their beliefs either. I respect the person. Regardless of ideology, the person is still the person. Fred Phelps will still be a huge douchebag if you take away the Christianity. And my grandmother will still be a very awesome, beautiful lady if you were to take away the Christianity. But I just feel this need, like I said, I'm a veteran. I served in the United States Army for 7 years. I was deployed to Iraq twice. And, I spent 27 months fighting a holy war, and I'm a skeptic anyways, by nature. Even before that, I was 18 years old. I didn't really like the idea of God. It made me uncomfortable. I thought it was probably not true. It just never really gave it much of my energy to really care. But boy, if you want to make an atheist out of a skeptic, send him off to fight a religious war. That's one way to do it. I remember shortly after setting boots on the ground on my second deployment, my gunner, she was talking about God and how Islam caused this. Islam in particular, she's Christian. Islam is what caused this country to be run down and tattered, and people to be, slaughtering their goats in the street for food, and, the trash everywhere and the worn down buildings. Islam caused that. And I'm like, I think you're kind of on the right track. I don't think it's specific to Islam, though. This is just the product of religion. I mean, look around. We saw a religion where these guys, they really do pray 5 times a day. You might have heard that. They really do pray 5 times a day. I mean, they have loudspeakers throughout the city. Let me describe Baghdad. It's a worn down city. It's dusty. It's trashy. There's some good parts, but that's only from the perspective of what's normal there. That the best looking part of Baghdad's going to be the slums of Detroit, Michigan, in the United States. So, you look around and you see this war-torn, tattered city, these dirty people living on the streets. They put up their little makeshift stores to make money, and, they herd their goats. And it's not like they have farms. The farms do exist, but not in the city of Baghdad. They don't really have farms. They have urban backyards where they raise goats, and they'll slaughter these goats. They'll just cut their throats in the street and chop them up, and then they sell the meat and have little, little food stands on the side of the road. And that's aside from all the wacky militant religious ideology they have. I'm just talking about how worn down they are, is how behind the times, how archaic their society is. And then you try and figure out the cause of it. My second deployment in particular, spent 15 months driving around and meeting with key leaders of the city of Baghdad. Not me personally. We were supporting a higher ranking officer, but we drive around and I noticed something after a while. Where are the schools? Normally in the United States, if you're an adult and you drive around during the school year and during, the early morning, you're not going to see kids anymore. They're all in school. They're all learning. Not there. No, no, no. They get up in the morning and their daily prayer, their dawn prayer from the imam is being broadcast through the streets on loudspeakers on every corner. It's the only thing you can hear. This just horrible singing. Oh my God, I don't wish it on anybody. Google it. It's terrible. The sound of a Islamic prayer in the streets. And they do this 5 times a day, and they stop everything to pray. They stop what they're doing, they get on their knees, they pull out their little rugs, and they bow down, and it looks like it's pathetic, to be honest with you. I mean, they go from being a normal adult trying to get by in life to just this subservient person kneeling on a rug and bowing to a direction where there's a building in Mecca. It's very interesting. What they don't have is schools. So they have this surplus of religion. It's inundated throughout the streets. Everything revolves around their religion. I mean, to say hi in Arabic, Salam alaikum, is a religious expression. Just like us in the United States, we say God bless you when people sneeze. It's like that when they say Salam alaikum. And their flag, the flag of Iraq, has religious scripture on the front of it, or at least it did when Saddam was there. I'm not too sure now. I don't really keep up on it. It's not something I really care to learn about anymore. But they're so inundated with it, they don't have just basic schools. I'm pretty sure none of those children, and when I say children, I mean teenagers, I'm sure none of them could do simple math or read. Well, no, they probably can read because they spend so much time studying the Quran. I mean, I'm sure they learn to read, but I'm sure they don't know math. I'm certain they don't know any science. All of their science comes out of the Quran. It's just a wacky society, and I almost feel like that's the worst case scenario. That's the end product. If we don't do anything, if we let America become this quote-unquote Christian nation and slide down this slippery slope of being a Christian theocracy, when it becomes the moment where our religion, our state-sanctioned religion, is more important than schools and infrastructure, we become like that. We become engulfed in this ideology that keeps us in the age that it was written in. And I feel like I need to speak out. I see things like that. I put my ass on the line. It could have possibly died. I'm glad nothing happened to me or anybody in my unit, but we were in that position. We could have easily been killed to support a war, which in the end, I mean, you call it oil, call it politics, whatever you want. In the end, those Muslims over there, they hate us because of how we help Israel. Because the Bible says that Israel's our holy land. Our being, the stereotypical Christian Americans. Israel's our holy land and we defend it. And the Muslims think the same of themselves. And when it boils down to it, that's what they're fighting about. Oh, politics aside, that's where the tension stems from. And I just feel like we're a smarter nation than that. Christianity's not what we were built on. It's, despite what anybody says, we are not a Christian nation. Our country exists because we were trying to get away from the church. The Church of England ran their country. They had control over us. They did whatever they want. They had a tyrannical king, and we broke away. We said no more church and state. The First Amendment to the United States Constitution says the Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. The first sentence. We do not have an established religion in this country. If you don't like it, I'm sorry. Propose a new amendment. Try to abolish the First Amendment, but read it first before you say that stupid quote, "America's a Christian nation. You don't like it, get out." That's just simply not the case. Things have evolved over the years, putting in God we trust on our money, which happened in the 50s, by the way. putting your hand over your heart, one nation under God, that it's part of our culture. Yes, there's more Christians here than there may be in the Middle East or, in India, but those kind of things were added to our culture after the fact. That's not what our founding fathers believed. As times changed, we went on to fight wars and become involved in huge conflicts like World War II. They pushed this idea of religion out on people. One nation, under God, indivisible. It just invokes that feeling of strength and unity, and then it gets stuck. And people like you and me, non-believers, are stuck saying it in school, putting our hands over our heart, saying one nation under God. And we don't really believe that. And that's not what our country was founded on. We're a melting pot. At least that's what I was always taught. The Statue of Liberty says, bring us your tired, your poor, your rich at masses, yearning to be free. It doesn't say you're Christians. It doesn't say you're believers. I certainly remember reading somewhere that we're dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, not just all Christian men. And again, I say, thinking about all this stuff, developing a passion for it, has just caused me to need to speak out. I feel like I need to say something. I have a little bit of writing talent. I like to think I have a brain. I know how to make websites. I really hope that I know something about podcasts. I hope this sounds good. You guys will probably all click the dislike button, which is fine. But I need to do something to help create awareness. There's lots of great people out there. You got Richard Dawkins, who wrote The God Delusion, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens. He just recently passed away. He was a great man. He's done a lot of things to further this movement and create awareness and get in those debates and really show people that it's okay to say, I don't believe this garbage. Daniel Dennett, same thing. You've got people that are just everyday Joes doing podcasts on the internet, creating websites. There's organizations out there like the Freedom from Religion Foundation that's run by Dan Barker. He's an evangelical, or was rather, I'm sorry. He was an evangelical minister. He's a preacher. He went around the country, dedicated his life to spreading the gospel throughout all the nations so every ear shall hear. And now he dropped his faith. He's the leader of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. He fights for a secular America. Him and his wife and his whole organization. They do great things. I certainly encourage you to look him up. But people like that have inspired me. I feel like I have something to say. And I'm gonna say it. Hopefully people listen. Either way, at least it'll be therapeutic to me, I'm sure. But hopefully people will listen. Hopefully we can create a little community here, come up with some ideas. I honestly, I have no direction right now. A lot of people they create a project like this, a website and a podcast and stuff, and they have some kind of mission, some goal. I'd have to say the only goal that I really have is just spreading the word, getting some people together, some like-minded people that can kind of lean on each other. And, we'll take it as it comes. I'm up for anything. I'm game. So let's see what we can do. As of right now, I'm just kind of rolling with the punches. Let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. Hopefully I can do a little research and get a little guidance on how to make a smoother podcast. I understand that this is a little rough. I'm probably not the best speaker in the world. I'm a tad unprepared. I'm hoping my rambling is covering up for the fact that I'm flying by the seat of my pants here. But I promise you I'll try to get better at this. I will be constantly writing articles for the website. Writing is a big passion of mine, more so than flapping my gums on the internet. And I'm going to try to recruit some more writers. I got a couple in the works right now. We're talking to someone named Marie. There's another writer who's going by the name A Soldier. I don't want to say a whole lot about him because I don't know what he's comfortable with releasing, but we'll probably hear from him soon. Got him signed up on the webpage. Got another good friend of mine. You might see his introduction on the website. His name, he's going by Atheist in Hiding, and he is just that. I will leave his personal life completely for him to divulge if he feels the need to do so or not. He is most definitely in hiding, and more power to him. He just kind of needs an outlet, and I support that. He actually kind of inspired me to get this thing started. So, short of that, we are looking for some more writers. If you're interested, go to purelyrational.com, click Contact Us, and go ahead and shoot me an email. Tell me what you got. We're not paying people. In order for me to pay people, I've got to make some money myself, and I'll tell you what, this is not a good way to make money. But if you're passionate about it, if you want to maybe create a portfolio of some writing examples, maybe you want to be a writer in the future, maybe you just want to get something off your chest, as long as you can hold your own writing, you can compose a sentence, keep me interested, make me laugh.
If you can write something that keeps me entertained, then by all means, send it on down. We'll see if we can get you on the site. I'm enthusiastic to get some more writers, some more angles, some more points of view, voices on the website. I can't wait to see how this thing evolves. So yeah, until next time, keep in touch, and hopefully we'll be coming out with more podcasts here in the near future. Thanks for listening.